Good morning. My name is Chris Johnston from the Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute, and my slot here, I'm going to talk to you about essentially environmental solutions to improve water quality exploiting short rotation coppice willow, or what I'll probably refer to as SRC willow. During this talk, I'm going to outline the water quality pressures. They shouldn't come as new. I think other speakers will have covered them, but it's important in the context of what we're talking about. Then the strategic direction that we actually have in Northern Ireland and what kind of promotes the work area that we're focusing on. I'm going to talk about some of the diffuse source management work we've been doing, specifically bringing in some replicated trials and also a concept site within the Catchment Care project based at Athby Hillsborough, and also the targeted interventions and how we can implement them further within a catchment. Then I'm going to spend some time and talk about point source management and how we're using SRC willow to actually manage point sources, which could be adding to pollution within our environment. And then I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on some catchment care aspects. So essentially what we have is a problem of too much phosphorus in our soils, essentially. The graph in the top left, the picture in the top left, everywhere you see the pink and the red, essentially indicate where phosphorus content in the soil is above agronomic optimum. And these areas will indeed, or will very likely be adding a level of phosphorus to our water environment. The graph on the right-hand side actually shows how dissoluble reactive phosphorus over the last sort of 15 to 20 years has been behaving within an average of 96 rivers. And we can see that we did have a general decline in dissolved reactive phosphorus up until about kind of, I suppose, the early decade. And that would have been as a result of a decrease in the importation of phosphorus fertilizers. However, you can see that there has indeed been an increase there, certainly over the last 5 years. And we put this down largely to the importation of animal feedstuffs for the livestock industry in Northern Ireland. So the bottom line is that about 55% of our water bodies are good or high status based on dissolved reactive phosphorus. And of course, this therefore needs improving. So what are we actually, where is policy, I suppose? What kind of recommendations do we have within Northern Ireland? What is the strategy that we are focusing on? And we can see here that the agri-land management strategy, which was produced by the experts and delivered to DARA back in about 2016. Within that the sustainable agri-land management strategy, we have a general kind of concept of what does sustainable land management look like in terms of pollution. And there is mention of woody riparian strips, woody biofiltration blocks, so they can capture pollution. These should be properly located, and to such a degree that there is a recommendation 3C in there, that the target of water quality interventions on at least 4,000 hectares of land by establishing woody riparian strips and overflow pathways and biofiltration blocks, where of course they can intercept discharges, for example, from farmyards or overland flows. So we can see that this is exactly the impetus, if you like, where this part of the work package comes from within catchment care. It's worth probably saying at this stage, why are we talking about fast-growing woody species like willow? What makes them so special? It's a question I'm often asked. And actually, Athby research and the general literature does indeed show very clearly that that SRC willow, the crop itself, has very high evapotranspiration rates. We'll often see it growing beside rivers, streams, wet areas. Willow establishes well. It grows well in our climate. We are lucky enough that there are progressive breeding programs, European breeding programs, Swedish breeding programs, which have been working on the genetics of such materials to make them, for example, good form, disease resistance, high yielding. So we have these to choose from and to pick our growth material. We also have good founded management and husbandry practices. We know that the willow also utilizes nutrients efficiently and it can protect groundwater. And we know that from the research. Now, how does it do all this? Okay, it's got several functions on soil properties. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but if we understand the concept that the willow, of course, by its high evapotranspiration rate and its activity in the soil, it will decrease soil moisture, increase the hydraulic conductivity, the permeability, the infiltration rates. It'll reduce the volumetric and the nutrient runoff of anything running past it. It'll improve the soil carbon, increase the soil carbon by leaf fall and root turnover, and of course, therefore, promote the microbial activity as well within the soil. So what did we do within Athby Hillsborough? Well, we have a site which we've had for the last 20 or so years. and we were using it to detect runoff from phosphorus or nitrates. However, we have adapted this site in about 2017. We thought, okay, we've got these 6 hydrologically separated areas. Instead of testing just straight for runoff, let's test the buffer capacity of willow plantations. So we can see, picture in the bottom right-hand side shows how the site was constructed. You can see the drainage going in, you can see the bunded lines going in, separating each area. So we've got 6 runoff plots about 14 meters wide by about 140 meters long, and we planted 3 in with willow. And the kind of willows we chose were commercial clones, as I say, from the European and Swedish breeding programs. We monitored a number of physical parameters such as soil infiltration, soil moisture, the penetrability, bulk soil density, and those pictures hopefully indicate there. It's just how we prepared those sites. We burned off the grass. We planted the willows by hand, obviously, but in the formation that the automatic planter would plant. And then finally, this is what we have. Is a site with 6 hydrologically separated areas. The yellow lines are showing the runoff when we get a rain event. If there's going to be runoff at all, that's the direction the runoff goes. It'll either hit the willow blocks or the grass blocks. Any runoff is then collected by these transverse troughs, which direct the water down to a V-notch weir. If there's enough, it will monitor the flow, the volume, and it'll take a representative sample for laboratory analysis and store it until it goes to the lab. Likewise, also the drainage water is monitored. Soil parameters, just to give an overview of some of the data we were getting, the graph on the left shows that over the time that we have been monitoring the moisture content on average of the grass areas and the willow areas, we are definitely getting a higher soil moisture all the time, continuously, from the grass areas than we are from the willow areas. Also, from a hydrological conductivity point of view, for this, we use an automated Saturo infiltrometer, and we can see that we are definitely getting higher soil hydrological conductivities, higher infiltration from the willow plots than we are in the grass plots. So this indeed would sort of back up what I was stating earlier. We are indeed finding it in our experimental work. So what are we actually coming down to in the end? Well, since the start of the project, we have been not just monitoring hydrological flows and concentrations, but we've been monitoring actual loading. So loading of phosphorus that runs through those buffer strips, be it grass or be it willow. And what we're actually seeing is absolutely so far, now this is only preliminary data, but we do seem to be seeing a reduction in P outflow. I've looked at cumulative particulate phosphorus here, which would probably be the highest difference, but the others are within the same kind of area, 30 to 40% reduced outflow, and that's what we're seeing. Now there are some long-term gaps there. That, as I mentioned before, this site is about 30 years old, so we had a bit of work to do to improve it, make sure it works, functions correctly. And also, you're aware that we did have a COVID lockdown last year for a length of time where we weren't receiving data. But the data we have been able to collect and analyze. What we are seeing is most definitely a difference. So taking that on board, what are we doing within catchment care as well? Well, we've taken a sub-catchment within the Athby Hillsborough site, and this is using a LiDAR digital terrain modeling where we can find the potential preferential pathways for runoff. And this is showing one catchment. It's a 22-hectare catchment, and we can see that everywhere you see the kind of the orange and the yellow, orange, even going on to red. Those are the most likely areas we will see runoff. And actually, from a physical inspection during the time before we planted, this is true to form. There was indeed wet areas where those lines were concentrating up. So what we've done is we've kind of taken that area and said, right, let's plant that up with willow, which indeed we have done, and this is what the site looks like today. There, just for a matter of reference, that was the replicated site, which I think lends very much the integrity to the work that we're kind of doing on this site. But there's the stream running down the catchment. There's the willow that we planted. We've got a continuous analyzer upstream and downstream. And now we've only been running this really for about 2 years so far, monitoring these 2 sites. So we're monitoring the data, if you like, from the start of the intervention to the end. And there's not an awful lot to say here, except for the fact it's early stages, and what we are definitely seeing is a deterioration in water quality from the upstream to the downstream, which of course we would see. It's an intensively agriculturally managed site. So I think what we'd like to say is, if the willows will do in this subcatchment what they are doing in the replicated site, then we would like to see the deterioration declining, and hopefully by the end of catchment care we will have some evidence of that. If not, we will have that, I'm sure, in the future. The willows are young, they're just established, they haven't even had a full harvest yet. One part has, but there's not an awful lot to extra to show on that. We've taken this concept a little further, and actually within the Alfby Hillsborough site we've planted these other areas. There's the area we've been talking about, but we have other areas as well where the LiDAR indicated the potential for contribution to water quality decline, and we've also planted those areas. Not only are they planted for water quality protection, but a large part of the catchment care project is what we're doing with this material. And this is just an illustration of the Alfby Hillsborough site, which is a good knowledge transfer site. And when there's no COVID, we get a lot of visitors. But we are demonstrating the whole process of the willow for biological protection, environmental protection, the wood chip processing. And we can see here that we are combusting this material, and it is the hot water is then being transmitted through a district heating network on the Alfby Hillsborough site, where the hot water is used in the dairy and piggeries and offices and conference rooms and wood chip drying facilities, the lot. So that 10 hectares that we have growing on site now, as an equivalence, it's about 45,000 litres of oil per year and about 18,000. So I think we can see that there is most definitely a value chain in there. If we take that a little further, as we have done within a summary within catchment care summary report, we've looked at the Blackwater, and actually what we've done within the Blackwater using some GIS work is indicate the fact that if we take all the streams, the most suitable streams, and we look at where they are in agricultural land areas, and we estimate a watercourse buffer site, and we analyze the agricultural activities, and we look at the digital elevation modeling, and are they areas that we can plant, and taking all the bits and pieces out of the equation that we can think of, we do actually end up with possibly about 3,000 hectares of willow that could be planted for water quality protection purposes within that catchment, which would contribute significantly to the biomass production on the site as well as water quality. So I want to go on now to the second part of what we're doing within catchment care using SRC willows, and is essentially using them for point source water management. What we're meaning by this is, let's take the point source, let's not discharge it to the environmental water system, but let's actually recycle it to willow plantation, using that pollution or nutrient to grow the crop, but likewise not discharge it therefore into the environment. And to illustrate this, I want to use one particular site which we've been working with Donegal County Council with, for a long time now, well, about 5 or 6 years, and that is one site running up in Bridgend, County Donegal. It's about 14 hectares, planted with SRC willow, receiving our wastewater discharge from a works, serving a population of about 600, 700 people, and that discharge is now being recycled to land as and when the willow plantation can take it, fields 1, 2, and 3. An indication of the kind of data we're getting from this, I think, is really interesting. The graphs on the left and right, just I've shown, for example, 2019 and 2020. The brown bars indicate the volumes of wastewater going into the treatment works, and the green bars indicate what's going out onto the willow plantations. In other words, what is not being discharged into the environment. And we can see that they're quite significant, the quantities, but most definitely much more significant during the summer months, which summer months, of course, are the times when the stream flow is small, lower rainfall potentially, higher warmth in the water, higher heat, more light, and therefore more prone, I suppose, to ecological decline. So by removing the discharge through those particular months and particular summer and spring season, we can afford the stream the best protection. To summarize it over the years, what I've done here in this graph is showed the volume that is recycled on average per year, which is about 50% of the inflow. However, we're up to about 80% on average through the summer. So these 2019-2020 aren't exactly out of context, but I think the figure of approximately 80% being recycled through the months of spring, summer, early autumn, I think is really important. So we've taken this concept on within catchment care, and we are charged with building 3 smaller sites to do exactly the same thing, to take the discharge out of the stream from what's currently being discharged and irrigate that out onto willow plantation, fertilize willow plantation while we're protecting the wastewater stream. And following on from the Ulster University presentation, I think the purpose is clear. So we have done we planted 2 sites up already, Liscooley and Cavanagh, and we are in the process of securing a 3rd site. Just as an example, here's Liscooley's site. It was planted last year. We can see that down here, the willows look kind of nice, and where you can see all the single stems. That was cut back then at the end of March, and we can see that we're already getting some regrowth on these particular fields. So that's going well. Next steps, of course, are to develop the tender for the irrigation system and the construction of whatever is required in order to disperse the effluent across the site. But this 3rd site, we do have difficulties, and actually it's been a strong learning within catchment care. There are difficulties when it comes to trying to persuade a farmer, a landowner, that this is a good deal to get involved into. And the options quite often are that the land is leased to third parties, or there's a doubt of whether willow is indeed is it a crop that's even worth considering? Is there a supply chain? Sure, what's going to happen at the end of it? Are you just going to plant it and then walk away? There's quite a lot of difficulties. Quite often, of course, the farmers can be elderly, and therefore they're not keen to change. They're really only used to maybe farming grass for dairy or for beef, or else, of course, they may expect a very large return. Once they hear that the council's involved, they say great, payday, and that's not what it's about. This is an agricultural activity. It's about an agricultural arrangement. It's producing an agricultural crop, which is a biomass crop, and all these aspects are part of a learning curve, and it has been a big learning curve, certainly for me and my team within this particular project. So what we're going to do once we have these sites tendered, essentially I'm using another demonstration site to indicate this. But what will happen? Generally, these are small wastewater treatment works. They may consist mainly of a baffled retention tank, and then finally a kind of a discharge through a gravel filter system. That's what this one is. And then what we look to do is we look to divert the discharge from whatever primary stroke secondary treatment is there into a sump, and that sump then is what we want to then irrigate the effluent from to the willow plantation in order to give it this tertiary treatment, polishing, and negate the discharge to the environment, which is what it's all about. And to indicate the mechanics in this a little bit more, this is a lovely picture inside a sump showing some fairly putrid, dirty water. This would normally be discharged into the stream, but there's the sump inflow into the stream now. That is no longer going out to the environment, it's going into the stream. There's a float switch there which turns on the pumps every time it gets high. That irrigates out into the willow field, and if it can't irrigate because it's too wet, cold, frozen, or just has been too much effluent irrigated, it'll overflow to the stream then, and there's a timer then which will give us an indication of what will actually be discharged. So we have all the data, and all the data is uploaded to an SMS. We've got full scatter of it. We can record temperature, rainfall, how much is irrigated, how much is discharged. We can correlate which zones everything is irrigated to. So this is all the works within the treatment works. However, the main bit that's doing all the work is, of course, in the field, and within that field we will have pipe systems, we'll have distribution pipe systems, we will have automatic valves, and we can see the picture on the right here. These are the irrigation pipes which run up through the willows. These are black pipes, but it just gives you an indication of these pipes running through the willows every 10 meters or so. These are irrigation points. When the irrigation happens, we see the effluent will come out. It probably won't be as animated as that. And then when we take the harvest away, there we go, lovely harvest taken away, tons and tons and tons of biomass for use, and we can see a discharge point there right in the middle of the field showing the irrigation. And this willow will grow back again, and within 3 years or so it'll be harvested again with another large harvest of material. So that's what's happening. Now, all of this together, we did hold a stakeholder conference back in February 2020, just before lockdown. We're lucky to get away with it, where we invited members of the public from a number of different sectors and interests, and we got them all together into a room in Dundalk, and we presented a number of different presentations, essentially exploring whether indeed SRC willow had a role to play in sustainable agriculture going forward. And we can see the large expanse of different attendees would have varied, from regulators to scientists to farmers to bioenergy practitioners. So there's a big expanse, and we asked a number of questions, and I think it was worthwhile maybe just running through a few of these here with you. So, first of all, is there a role for fast-growing woody tree species within the intensive agricultural landscape? That's an important question. are we barking up the wrong tree here, or is there a role, like the agri-land management strategy states at the start? Well, overwhelmingly, 98%. I think I know who the 2% was, but 98% overwhelmingly say, yeah, of course there's a role. And if so, to what extent? You know, how much of our agricultural land could indeed grow biomass crops for agricultural diversification and to protect the environment? And I think the main two ones here would be sort of less than 10% and 10 to 20%. So that's nearly 90% of people reckon that, you know, between 20 and 0 of our land should be used. And there are some that should be higher. So I think I can take some confidence. We can all take some confidence that it is indeed something which we definitely need to consider. And then there's a number of other questions there, such as in the backdrop of zero carbon. Is it, do you believe that willows could be part of our national solution reducing greenhouse gases? And again, overwhelmingly yes. So biomass, has it got a future? You would have to think it most definitely does. And actually currently there are some very significant UK initiatives to try to develop the potential of bioenergy or biomass crops to supply biomass into the future to help meet the net zero carbon 2050. So I think on that point, I've used up my 20 minutes and I will pass over to yourselves for questions. Thank you.